Excuse me, I'm aware that I haven't uploaded in quite some time, but I just can't get enough of these Mario Party gadgets. Remember Morse Maker? Well, try to guess what this is. Well, you're correct. S.O.S. That's right. Now here's a bonus. Do you know what S.O.S. stands for? Almost. You see, most people think it stands for Save Our Ship or Ship Out Sea, but in reality, it actually stands for Samuel Othyus Schrader, or as he wanted to be called, the original S.O.S. Well, you aren't alone, Barnaby. A lot of people don't know the story about Sam. And quite frankly, it's pretty complicated. You see, with the invention of the radio in the late 1890s, a lot of sailors and sea dogs took that opportunity as a potentially efficient way for maritime communication, specifically through the Morse code. Now, despite the Morse code existing for decades up to that point, there was still a vast majority of individuals who had trouble decoding, let alone understanding the Morse language, especially in towns of poverty. Foul-mouthed England was no exception. You were either a grunt worker or you were a bum. You were either a house poodle or you were a courtesan. And Samuel Othyus Schrader wanted to be neither. His father was a sailor, his mother was a tailor, his brother was a whaler, and his sister was an architect. However, all Samuel wanted to do all day was twig with the radio and flick his bean. In fact, I'll call it a safe bet to assume that Samuel was the only inhabitant of Falmouth during that time period who can solve any Morse code you threw at him. He wore that with a badge of pride. Well, one night he wanted to test the strength of the signal from the radio of his father's ship to the recently built Falmouth transmission tower. He told the port captain, Phil McElroy, he was going to sail 5 miles west of the bay with a sailor friend of his, simply known as Tancredi. All was a go, and off they went. Everything seemed fine. When they reached their destination, Samuel was pleased to see that the signal still worked, as if it were only 5 yards away from the tower. However, he estimated that the signal would be strong enough to communicate from 12 miles out. Much to Tancredi's vexation, they continued to sail. What Samuel didn't estimate, however, was the weather. It started with light sprinkling at the 8-mile mark. Tancredi wanted to turn back, but Samuel urged him to plunge forward. Unfortunately, 9 miles in, the rain began to ferociously thunder from above. It was coming down harder than a Fat Mary on a Wednesday. A panicked Tancredi began to steer the ship back east around, while Samuel worked the radio, dispatching all kinds of Morse codes toward her transmission tower. But to no avail, the inexperienced transmission laborers couldn't figure out who was sending them and for what reason.
Hello? Hello? What's happening? Someone's beeping at us. I thought someone was making sandwiches. Oh, maybe they are. Operator, send a turkey with mayo and... Quit hanging up the phone. Ask if he's got ham. Of course they'll have ham, you galoot. Operator, whip us 2 biggies. Extra mustard, please. Oh, something fell out of me.
After 15 minutes, the boat had been flooded to the gunwale and it began sinking. Frantically, as a last-ditch effort, Samuel sent out a Morse code of his initials.
What kind of a sandwich shop are you? No Swiss? You must have no cheese at all. Hey, what's wrong with you?
I hurt my dinghy.
Silly knuckleheads. Somebody's sending out a distress call.
Phil McElroy said as he busted into the room.
Sounds like they're trying to say S.O.S. What could that mean? Wait a minute. Aha! Samuel Othyus Schrader. He must be in trouble. All right, I'm heading out there. You two stay here and call every stevedore on the deck. We got an emergency on our hands.
Hey, is my sandwich ready?
So, he gathered up his crew, and at full tilt, they headed west. The storm calmed down a bit, but was still giving them fits. When he reached the 5-mile mark, they couldn't find a single trace of the ship. It looked to be a lost cause. But McElroy ordered his crew to continue searching. All seemed to be hopeless, until they found something in the waves. They first assumed it was a bloated corpse, until it started waving their arms. It was old Sammy Boy. Sadly, Tim Grady was nowhere to be found. He quickly got Sam on board and headed back to the harbor. The papers the next day celebrated the heroic efforts of Captain McElroy and his crew, though Phil stated how their call to action would have not occurred if Sam didn't send out that S.O.S. By all accounts, this was a miraculous event that changed the course of technological history. How a simple beep saved someone's life. Yet one man's jealousy tilted his life into a downward spiral. About a week later, the S.O.S. became the go-to distress single of Foulmouth. It was programmed in all their minds that it meant someone was in dire straits. And as months passed, more and more people were becoming fascinated with this cutting-edge creation of the radio. Less than a year later, nearly all of Europe knew about the S.O.S. Nobody outside of Falmouth questioned where it originated from. Just like nobody really questions where 911 derived from. We just accepted it and moved on. It wasn't about Samuel anymore. Hardly ever was in the first place. And he resented that with a passion. No longer an eager individual curious about the progression of technology, he was now a writer, a self-proclaimed prophet, the original S.O.S. If you read the papers in Falmouth every Monday morning, you'll be sure to find a 10, 20, 30, 40, sometimes even a 50-paragraph diatribe of gibberish. Always reintroducing himself every week, telling stories of his past as if anyone asked for them in the first place. But most importantly, the desperate pity stories. He believed he was owed something and entitled adoration for the people's safety and well-being. Yet everyone disrelished him. His own mother, father, his siblings, even his guardian angel, Phil McElroy. The town of Falmouth built a bust to honor McElroy's service when he retired. And overnight, somebody defaced and destroyed the poor captain's sculpture. Of course, we all know who did it, but Samuel loved to deny. The only thing Samuel loved more than denying was lying. His whole backstory, his life, it was all fake. When he visited the States, he claimed to be in a loving relationship with stage actress Doris Rankin at the time, even though she married Lionel Barrymore that summer. He one time got arrested for indecent exposure and said his pants fell because he had recently lost 35 pounds. In reducing, he wrote a scathing article about Hearts of the World director C.W. Griffin, even though his name was D.W. Griffith. He didn't even know who he was complaining about. Years down the road, April 18th, 1919 to be exact, story in the papers came out. He apparently put a gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. However, a lot of skeptics and doubters believed he wrote a fake article in the papers for attention, I guess. I don't know. Let's carry on. Now, Sam isn't the only SOS that's practically been forgotten in the history books. It might behoove you to know that there actually is a Super Nintendo title called S.O.S. In fact, there's two of them. Isn't that strange? Two completely different games with the same title on the same console. I've never seen that before. However, this one made sure to parenthesize it as Sink or Swim, aka the Andrea Yates story. We're just gonna review this one. S.O.S. was released in the States on April 10th, 1994, and was produced by our good old pals at Vekatakai. Now, I have previously reviewed a VT title by the name of Psycho Fox, which is one of, if not the best game on the Sega Master System. However, they did not develop SOS. In fact, when it was originally released for the Super Famicom in May of 1993, it was developed and produced by Human Entertainment, who are definitely not aliens. While they're best known for their Clock Tower titles, I always regard them decorsely for kickstarting the Fire Pro Wrestling series. Speaking of fire, they also developed and produced a terrific action-packed game called The Fireman, which sadly never made it across the pond for a North American release. Instead, we got Super Soccer. Not like there's anything wrong with soccer. So, time to put on our life vests and brace ourselves. SOS on the Super Nintendo is coming right up. Like an orgasm. The story takes place in 1921, 100 years ago, on aboard the Lady Crithania. Crithania, yeah, I'm saying that correctly, right? Yeah.
Sounds like a bacterial infection. Anyway, all is going swell. You're just chatting up with a few folks and checking out the ladies' restroom, you pervert. Then all of a sudden, oh no! A storm has hit the Pacific and has capsized the entire ship, which means, you guessed it, you gotta find a way to get the heck out of there. You can't lollygag either, as you have 1 hour in real time to escape. If you just so happen to, die in the process, then that's 5 minutes clipped off the clock. Tick-tock, motherfucker! That means that yes, there's no password system. You gotta do this all in one go, Joy Boy. But a good thing is that there's no lives to worry about. Kind of. I'll get to that later. Anyway, there's 4 playable characters just like in Psycho Fox. And no, you don't have to save all 4 of them in an hour. It said there's 7. Why 7? I'll get to that later. Now these 4 characters have their own 1 hour time slot, so whoever you select, you're stuck with for the next 60 minutes. You have Caprice Walker, an architect just like Sister Sammy Sam, Redren Gardner, a counselor with a bunch of brats, Jeffrey Howell, a doddering doctor, and Luke Haynes, a crewman of the ship who I find the most fun to play as. Now, pause. No, don't actually pause the video, but I got a question for you. With the plot centered around a small group of survivors trying to escape a large ship, you might not be surprised to find out that S.O.S. is based off a novel/film. I'll give you all 10 seconds to guess on what that is, starting now. And if you're correct, then Virtual Barnaby will plant a virtual kiss on those luscious lips of yours, so get those guesses in, whiz kid. And time's up. If you said Titanic, you're wrong. If you said The Last Voyage, you're wrong. If you said Das Boot, you're wrong. If you said The Poseidon Adventure, you're right! Okay, now buckle up, Buttercup. Here we go. Ready? Set? There, I knew you'd get it. And if you didn't guess at all and just wanted a free smooch. Yeah, The Poseidon Adventure. The plots on both titles nearly mirror each other, though the characters require a deeper dive. Now, this isn't an official study, this is just my professional take on it, and Paul Calico can haunt me in my visions like, ooh, you're way off, ooh, you're not even close, ooh. Whatever. Number 1, Caprice Wisher's character arc is based around Susan Shelby, as both Wisher and Shelby are tending to their younger sibling.
Why couldn't I have had a brother that's a little easier to live with?
Personality-wise, I guess he leans towards Red Button's character of James Martin, as they're both rather shy, but gather up the courage as the story progresses.
Can't you see the logic?
Number 2, Redren Gardner seems to be based on Reverend Scott, especially since the Japanese version of S.O.S., he's a pastor. They both lead a small group of strangers to safety, and in Gardner's case, though, it's the family he's traveling with. By the way, is that Ted DiBiase? Number 3, Jeffrey Howell is based on both Manny Rosen and Dr. Perry Caravello.
I'm Dr. Caravello. I believe you've been calling me all morning.
With Rosen because he's old and married, just like Howell is with his wife Adela, and Caravello because he's a doctor. And he may have blown a casting director. And number 4, Luke Haynes, who can be any redshirt crewman aboard the ship. The reason why I consider Haynes' story to be the most entertaining is because the other characters have your quintessential damsel or damsels in distress to deal with, while Haynes has the duty to save his captain. Now in the film The Poseidon Adventure, the ship's captain is portrayed by none other than Leslie Nielsen in his pre-comedy days.
You irresponsible bastard.
So I like to imagine that's who I'm saving in S.O.S. And quite frankly, any game that has a storyline like that deserves a golden star. Now back to the gameplay, you'll find yourself exploring every nook and cranny aboard the Lady Crithania. That doesn't sound right. The ship will continue to be all topsy-turvy and you'll find yourself completely upside down in most portions of the game. It's like I'm actually there. Now this might sound a little dull, especially considering there's 0 enemies to deal with, which is the smart move. Let's be honest, why would anyone be trying to kill you on a sinking ship unless you're Billy Zane? But I still found it pretty tense, especially since you can't see the hour clock ticking down. It's only when you die. Eesh. Now you might be assuming that if your character stumbles upon the exit early into the game that it wouldn't allow you to leave because, oh, you need to rescue more survivors or any of that jazz. But actually, no, you can pull a George Costanza and push every child, clown, and elderly curmudgeon all the way to escape. But the game will scold you for being selfish.
We needed a leader. Someone to lead the way to safety.
Which leads me into the 2 points I brought up earlier, that yes, you do have to worry about lives. The more passengers you save, the more points you get, and the more points you get, the better the ending is for your character. Which leads to a variety of endings for each playthrough. In order to get the best ending, you'll have to rescue 7 passengers, including your certain companion who's worth the most points. It's kind of fucked up when you think about it. By the way, yes, those passengers can die along the way, as in you don't get a restart if they perish. You can, they can't. That's really fucked up. Now another similarity this game has with Psycho Fox is the stiff controls, which doesn't seem that bad since Psycho Fox still works as a very efficient platformer, but you're also not in a rush to save passengers in that game. It's tricky enough to navigate on your own, but to lead someone, let alone a group, through tight spaces and creaky dips can be annoying.
It is very annoying.
Anyway, all the stories conclude in the boiler room stage, which is a fucking pain, especially if you're running low on time. This is one of those stages where you should look up a tutorial beforehand, because there's a lot of traps, using that in air quotes by the way, that you wouldn't likely see coming the first go around. Alright, so I rescued 6 survivors, but I can't get the best ending unless I save my sister. I do find it amusing that if you just straight up abandon your sister, you'll still get an A rank ending. No, I'll get a CS ending. The dialogue is pretty amusing.
Leave me alone.
Huh.
Let go of my hand.
What?
Let go of my hand.
Okay.
After you quit bickering, you polo up and escape. Despite it being the best ending, it is pretty sorrow that over 2,000 people on board still die. That's even more than the Titanic. But hey, at least your sister's alive. It's time for the final verdict. Is S.O.S. another hidden gem like Psycho Fox? Almost. It's very close. I don't want to use that word so freely, but I do think it's one of the most ambitious titles you'll find on a 16-bit console. For starters, it's one of the first games that requires a time limit to beat, and it's one of the first survival games in general. Of course, there's the Oregon Trail from 1985, there's Wilderness, a survival adventure from 1986, and Unreal World from 1992. However, all 3 of those games were released on home computers only. S.O.S., in my eyes, is the very first survival game released on a home video console. It wouldn't be until another 3 years when another survival game was released on another console, Tale of the Sun for the PlayStation 1. To say S.O.S. is overlooked is actually kind of an understatement, ironically. That is, until you actually play the game. Have they smoothened out the controls, added a running feature, cause you're in a sinking ship after all, and made the AI a lot more smarter? This could have easily been a top 10 Super Nintendo title, and that's saying a lot. The graphics are pleasing to the eye, the music is fine. But the biggest attribute this title has is its replay value. Even though the passengers are located at the same location every time, there's still a lot to discover on the ship, even before it starts sinking. This wasn't made to be a quick rental to kill an hour or so. This was handled with a lot of care and dedication. Out of a 10, I gotta roll with the 8.8. Yes, this is a flawed game. Yes, this could have been an all-time classic had it not been for the imperfect controls and obtuse AI. But should that stop you from playing it? Absolutely not. S.O.S. is a great game that was almost brilliant. A well-constructed and innovative title that deserves to be recognized. Alright, blow the foghorn.
Oh!
And set sail. Me old trout.